my name is Eve Bogdanove, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I practice as a psychotherapist in Greenfield, Massachusetts. I identify as a white-skinned Jew, middle-class, educated, professional, queer, fat femme, single mom by choice, of Catholic, French, Canadian, and Russian, Ashkenazic, Jewish descent. This letter came to EmbraceRace from Auntie in California. Dear EmbraceRace, I am a white woman and recently heard from my sister-in-law that my 12-year-old niece said the following the other day about her middle school in Virginia. It seems like all the Black kids are always the ones getting in trouble. I want to send my sister-in-law some resources and also be prepared myself when we see them this summer in case this kind of thing is said again. How do we address a comment like this? She is very sheltered and privileged. I want to respond in 4 parts. First, I'm so happy that you're asking this question because it brings up a common anxiety that white people have, that if we talk about race, we are not being nice and we are being racist. And that is simply not true. That's the argument of color blindness. The reality is that the more we teach kids and parents about race and racism, the closer we get to extinguishing racism. And you know this because you're raising this question. So just remember that her observation is probably true. And it's okay to acknowledge that and to validate that. The second point I would make is to remember that observations are sometimes value neutral and sometimes not. So it's important to get curious about not just the observation, but to get curious about why that is. What is impacting that? What is impacting that? So one of the things is, what does your niece see in terms of how other race kids are treated? Are there teachers of color in the school? Are the interactions different between the teachers of color and the Black students, or the teachers of color and the white-skinned students? How quickly are Black students how quickly are these interactions around small behaviors being escalated by teachers or authority figures? Is it different depending on the race of the teacher, depending on the race of the student? And how does she understand that difference? Why does she think that is? What is the story that she's telling herself or that she's hearing from her parents about why these differences exist? I also think about, in terms of hoping to challenge what bias she might have around, what are the expectations of Black students versus white-skinned students versus brown-skinned students about how they're going to be treated or valued in the world? And then does that then inform their behavior in terms of how they respond to authority figures? So I feel like there's lots of questions we can get curious about and ask when someone makes a statement that might be, have significant value attached to it. And our job is to get curious and unpack it. The third point I want to make is that I think it makes sense that you would be anxious about seeing your sister-in-law this summer. I think many people have anxieties about how to respond to family members who may have racial biases or behaviors. And it makes sense because it's 2018 and we are finally having a national conversation across races about race and racism. And so it's a very exciting time right now. So you are not alone in that anxiety. And there's lots of things to read about, to get information. There's stuff coming out every week. Just this week, Tuesday or Wednesday, I read an article from The Nation by Lori, what is her name? It was a great article. It was all about the school to prison pipeline and all the issues that I imagine you're picking up on from your niece's comment. It's an article by Lori Bezahler, Bezahler. So just this week, you could read that. So the last point I want to make is that the biggest factor in systemic racism is people's fear talking about it. So anytime teachers or authority figures or aunties talk with people, with kids about race, it undoes the shame and it breaks the silence. And from my perspective, that's only good for mental health, and that's only good for social health and public health. So it's great that you're asking this question. My name is Bogdanove, and I embrace race.